Welcome to a place where the shadows linger, and the unknown lurks just beyond the light. Tonight we dive into a chilling tale that will make your skin crawl and your heart race. A story of terror, suspense, and the unimaginable. So, sit back, if you dare, and let your fear take over. This is a story you won't soon forget. Are you ready? Let's begin. When Anna's family moved into the old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, it was supposed to be the fresh start they desperately needed. The last year had been hard. Her father had passed suddenly, leaving her mother and her alone to pick up the pieces. Grief hung over them like a thick fog, and when her mother found the house, it seemed like a sign. The price was shockingly low for such a large home, nestled away from the bustle of the city, offering the peace and quiet her mother thought they both needed. But the house was old, very old. It stood at the end of a long, gravel driveway, surrounded by dense woods. The paint had faded to a dull gray, and the front yard was choked with weeds. Inside, it was spacious but cold, the kind of place that never seemed to hold warmth, no matter how many fires were lit. The floors creaked underfoot, and there was a constant draft that made Anna shiver, even on warmer days. Anna wasn't sure what to think of the place. At 16, she was more focused on missing her friends back in the city than worrying about her new home. But there was something about the house that felt off. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on right away. It was more like a subtle unease, like the air was too still, the shadows a little too deep. But she pushed it aside. It was just an old house, she told herself. It would take some time to get used to. The first week passed without much incident. Anna spent most of her time unpacking, exploring the large house, and trying to make it feel more like home. Her mother busied herself with repairs, fixing broken windows, repainting, and hiring a contractor to deal with the leak in the roof. But on the seventh night, Anna heard something strange. It was late, well past midnight. She had been tossing and turning, unable to sleep, when she heard a faint sound, like a soft scratching. It seemed to be coming from the wall near the foot of her bed. She sat up, listening closely. The noise came again, a soft, repetitive scrape, like nails against wood. At first, she thought it was just the house settling, or maybe some animal caught in the walls. But as the sound continued, it began to take on a rhythm. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Pause. Almost as if something, or someone, was deliberately trying to get her attention. Heart pounding, Anna got out of bed and pressed her ear to the wall. The sound stopped immediately. She waited, her breath catching in her throat, but there was nothing. After a minute, she decided it must have been her imagination and returned to bed. Yet sleep eluded her, and she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint echoes of the sound still replaying in her mind. The next morning, she mentioned it to her mother. "It's probably just the wind," her mother said dismissively, sipping her coffee. "Old houses like this make all sorts of noises." Anna wasn't so sure, but she let it go. Maybe her mother was right. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Scratch. 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 The sound seemed to be coming from all around her room, moving from one wall to the next, like something was crawling inside the walls. Anna tried to ignore it, pulling the blankets over her head, but the noise was persistent. When she finally mustered the courage to get out of bed, the sound abruptly stopped, just like before. For the next few nights, the scratching continued. Sometimes it would happen early in the evening, other times well after midnight. Anna found herself growing more and more unsettled, but her mother remained unfazed. The house was old, she kept reminding Anna, and old houses made strange sounds. It wasn't until the end of the second week that something changed. Anna was in the kitchen late one evening, making a cup of tea. Her mother had gone to bed hours earlier, exhausted from a long day of painting the upstairs hallway. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant groan of the wind outside. As she stirred her tea, she heard a soft thud, like something had fallen in the living room. Startled, she went to check. Nothing seemed out of place. But as she turned to go back to the kitchen, she saw it. A figure, standing in the hallway, just at the edge of the shadows. Anna froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The figure was tall and gaunt, its features obscured by the darkness, but it was unmistakably human-shaped. She blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her, but when she looked again, it was still there. "Mom," she whispered, though she knew it wasn't her mother. The figure didn't move. Anna's skin prickled with fear. She took a step back, her legs trembling. The figure remained still, its face lost in the shadows, its presence oppressive. She felt as though she was being watched, scrutinized. Without another word, she bolted upstairs to her room, slamming the door behind her and locking it. For hours, she sat huddled in her bed, listening, waiting for something to happen. But the house was silent. No footsteps, no scratching. Just an eerie, heavy stillness. The next morning, she asked her mother if she had been downstairs the night before, but her mother shook her head. "I was out cold," she said, frowning at Anna's pale face. "You really need to get some rest, honey. You're starting to look exhausted." Anna didn't tell her about the figure. She didn't know how to explain what she had seen. Was it even real? Could she have imagined it? The stress of the move, the new house, the grief still fresh from losing her father. It was all too much, but deep down, Anna knew what she had seen. Something was in the house. That night, the scratching came back, but this time, there was a voice. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It was a whisper. Hoarse, dry, like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of dust. Anna sat up in bed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Desperate, pleading. The whisper grew louder, more frantic. The scratching resumed, this time at her door. Anna clutched her blanket, paralyzed with fear. She could hear the sound of something scraping against the wood, as if trying to claw its way inside. Then, suddenly, the doorknob rattled. Anna let out a strangled gasp, stumbling out of bed. She backed away, her eyes locked on the door. The whispering was louder now, filling the room, wrapping around her like a cold, suffocating mist. She could feel something on the other side of the door, something that desperately wanted to get in. But just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The house fell into an oppressive silence, the kind that made Anna's ears ring. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. When she finally mustered the courage to move, she opened the door. There was nothing there. No sign of anything or anyone. But as she turned to look down the hallway, she saw something glimmering on the floor. A small, delicate object. It was a key. Anna picked it up, her hand trembling. It was old, rusted, the kind of key that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. But what was more unsettling was that she had seen this key before. It had been hanging on a hook in the basement, among a collection of forgotten tools and old, dusty boxes. Her mind raced. How had it ended up here? What did it unlock? The following day, Anna couldn't stop thinking about the key. She carried it with her everywhere, feeling its weight in her pocket, trying to piece together its significance. The basement had always unnerved her, dark, cold, and filled with the scent of damp earth. Her mother hadn't even been down there yet, saying she'd leave that part of the house for later. But something told Anna that the key and the basement were connected. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, Anna crept down the stairs, clutching the key tightly in her hand. The house was eerily silent, the kind of silence that felt thick and suffocating. She reached the basement door, her heart hammering in her chest. Slowly, she unlocked it and descended the creaky stairs. The basement was just as she remembered, cold, damp, and filled with shadows that seemed to shift as she moved. But there was something new. In the far corner, behind a pile of old furniture, was a door. A door she hadn't noticed before. Her heart pounded in her ears as she approached it. The door was small, almost hidden, with a keyhole that matched the old key she had found. Anna hesitated, her mind screaming at her to turn back, to run. But something urged her forward, a strange, magnetic pull. With trembling hands, she slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a small, narrow room. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, and the walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges. In the center of the room was a single wooden chair, and on the chair sat a small dusty box. Anna stepped inside the narrow room, her eyes locked on the small dusty box resting on the chair. The air felt even colder here, the kind of cold that seemed to seep into her bones. The oppressive silence wrapped around her, and the strange pull that had led her down here grew stronger, urging her forward. She approached the chair cautiously, her breath shallow and her pulse racing. The box was simple and unadorned, the wood warped with age, covered in a thick layer of dust. It looked so fragile, as if it might fall apart at the slightest touch. For a moment, she hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave, to close the door and never return to this hidden room. But she couldn't. Something had brought her here, something that needed her to open that box. With a trembling hand, she wiped away the dust and gently lifted the lid. Inside, there was only a single item, an old photograph. Anna picked it up, holding it close to the faint light filtering through the doorway. Her stomach clenched as she studied the image. It was a family mother, father, and a little girl standing in front of the very house she now lived in. But what sent a chill down her spine was the little girl's face. She recognized her. The girl in the photograph looked exactly like Anna. She blinked, her mind reeling. It couldn't be. The photo was old, yellowed with time, the clothes outdated by at least 50 years. But the girl's face was unmistakable, her face. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing down, suffocating her with a weight she hadn't noticed before. The whispers returned, faint at first, like a distant breeze, but quickly growing louder. They circled her, swirling around the small room, filling her head with fragmented words she couldn't understand. She dropped the photograph and stepped back, her heart racing, but as she moved, she heard a soft thud from beneath the floorboards, like something had shifted underneath her feet. The whispering stopped abruptly, and the air turned heavy with anticipation. Anna glanced down. The floorboards in the corner of the room seemed uneven, slightly raised, as if something had been placed beneath them. A sense of dread washed over her, but she couldn't ignore the strange compulsion to investigate. Kneeling, she pried at the loose boards until they came free, revealing a small, shallow space. Inside was another box. This one smaller, locked, and far more ornate than the first. It was made of dark wood, etched with symbols she didn't recognize, and it gleamed as if it had been untouched by time. Her hand shook as she reached for it, but when her fingers touched the surface, a jolt shot through her, as if the box were alive with energy. Suddenly, the room felt darker, as though the shadows were pressing closer, suffocating the faint light that had once filtered through the doorway. She glanced up, her breath catching in her throat. The door she had entered through was now shut, and standing in front of it was the same figure she had seen in the hallway days ago. The tall, gaunt figure stood motionless, its face hidden in darkness. Anna stumbled back, clutching the ornate box to her chest. The figure moved slowly, stepping toward her with deliberate, agonizing slowness. As it approached, the whispers grew louder, more frantic, filling the room with an overwhelming, suffocating presence. It wasn't until the figure stepped fully into the faint light that Anna saw its face. It was her own. The face was twisted, gaunt, and drained of life, but it was unmistakably hers. The figure smiled a cold, lifeless grin that sent a wave of terror through her body. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure whispered, its voice layered with a chorus of voices, all echoing at once. Anna couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure extended a hand toward her, its fingers long and skeletal, reaching for the box she held tightly in her arms. "No," Anna whispered, stepping back, her back pressed against the cold wall of the room. She could feel the presence of the house all around her now, alive, watching, waiting. The figure tilted its head, its eyes narrowing. "You were always meant to find it," it said, its voice hollow, the sound vibrating through the walls. "It was waiting for you. We were waiting." With trembling hands, Anna fumbled with the box's lock, desperately trying to open it, though she had no idea why. She felt that whatever was inside held the key to escaping this nightmare. Her fingers worked quickly, and with a soft click, the lock released. The moment the box opened, a rush of cold air exploded from inside, filling the room with a piercing, high-pitched scream. Anna stumbled backward, dropping the box as it fell to the floor. The scream intensified, shaking the very walls, and the figure before her recoiled, its face contorting in pain. Something was happening, something powerful. From the box, a swirling, dark mist began to rise, twisting and spiraling through the air. Anna's heart pounded as she watched in horror, but then, out of the mist, came a voice, a single, clear voice cutting through the chaos. "Anna," it whispered, soft and familiar. "Run." It was her father's voice. The recognition jolted her from her paralysis. Without thinking, Anna sprinted for the door. The figure lunged toward her, its skeletal hand reaching out to grab her, but she was faster. She threw open the door and raced up the basement stairs, slamming the door behind her. She ran through the house, her legs burning with adrenaline. The walls seemed to pulse with life as the whispers chased her, growing louder with each step, but she didn't stop. She burst out the front door and into the cold night air, collapsing on the porch. For a long moment, she lay there, panting, staring up at the night sky. The house loomed behind her, dark and silent, but she could still feel it watching her, waiting for her to return. She didn't. Instead, Anna stood up, her body trembling, and walked toward the end of the long driveway. As she reached the gate, she stopped and looked back at the house one last time. The wind whispered through the trees, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw a figure standing in one of the upstairs windows, watching her with hollow eyes. But then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Anna turned away and walked down the road, never looking back again. The house on the outskirts of town would remain abandoned, forgotten by everyone except her. It had tried to take her, just as it had taken the others before her. But she had escaped. And in her heart, she knew that somewhere, her father had helped her break free from its grasp. The house would never forget her. It would wait for another. But Anna would never return.